Hello, class. Professor Mandeville back. This is lecture number 5 for state and local government, summer 2020. And today what I want to talk about is material that's contained on page 30, 31 of your textbook in the federalism chapter. And I like to call this section the division of powers. And what I'm referring to is how powers are divided up in the United States Constitution. And this relates to the whole concept of federalism that we talked about previously. So I'm going to treat this a little bit differently than your textbook does, but it'll all become clear here in a minute. Now, your book starts out talking about on page 30, both in the text and in the little chart below it, with enumerated powers. Enumerated powers are powers that are granted to typically the government, state, federal branches of it, or to the people themselves in the Constitution. Now, a little bit of background information here. The first government that we operated under, the Articles of Confederation, which existed from 1781 until 1788, was a total failure. That's why the Founding Fathers gathered in Philadelphia to come up with a new form of government, the Constitution, which we still operate under today. Now, to put this in a nutshell, the Articles of Confederation gave all the big powers to state governments. And it's because the founders were a bit, I'd like to say they had a hangover effect from the Revolutionary War. They were really paranoid about giving any powers to a centralized federal government because they related that to two things. King George III of England, who they revolted against, and Parliament, who they revolted against. They wanted nothing that resembled those two and made sure they didn't have it. Well, they succeeded in that, but the system they set up almost caused a complete economic collapse in America, so they had to fix it with the Constitution. So, the first type of powers I want to talk about in a little bit more detail are what I like to call inherent powers. Meaning, the federal government had these powers under the Articles of Confederation and inherited them from that document, and they carried forward into the Constitution. Two examples of those: power to declare war. Now, the power to declare war is a power specifically of Congress, but it's the federal government. In your constitutions, you'll notice that in Article 1, Section 8, that power is granted to Congress. There's a bit of confusion about declarations of war. It's not a power of the executive branch or the presidency. They're commander-in-chief of the armed forces, but they cannot declare a war. Declaring an all-out war is a very serious matter. That's why the United States government has only done that 7 times in its history. And the last time we had a full-out declared war was World War II. So, that's a power that the feds had under the Articles of Confederation, continued to have it under the Constitution. Another example would be the power to enter into treaties with foreign governments. That's something the federal government could do under the Articles of Confederation and continue to do so. And it only makes sense with both of these. Treaties are nation-to-nation agreements. Wars are nation-to-nation conflicts, not a state to a nation, or for example, let's use some goofy examples. New York State gets really angry with Quebec. New York declares war on Quebec. How's that going to work? It has to be the entire United States declaring war on Canada, which obviously is not going to happen. Or let's say Texans got angry with Mexico. They declare war on Mexico. No, they don't. And the same thing goes for Texas and New York. They can't enter into treaty arrangements with anybody. The United States does that. So, That's inherent powers. The next one I want to talk about is delegated powers. Delegated powers are powers that the states exclusively held under the Articles of Confederation, and they were delegated or shifted over to the federal government. Examples of those are, first of all, regulation of interstate commerce. Under the Articles of Confederation, states could place tariffs on items that came from foreign nations, and they could also place tariffs on state-to-state trade. Obviously, that doesn't happen today. The federal government's the one who places tariffs on items from other foreign countries, and there's free trade among the states. Under the Articles of Confederation, this was a major problem. These state-to-state tariffs really were ruining the economy. Another example of delegated powers would be coining money. Under the Articles of Confederation, we had 14 official forms of money. The federal government coined money, all 13 states did. This was a nightmare because all 14 currencies had fluctuating values based on the economic health of the government that issued them. So some money was quite valuable, like Virginia currency was the most valuable because they had a thriving economy based on tobacco. Currency issued by the state of Massachusetts was basically worthless. Their economy had collapsed. This was a nightmare. If we had the same system today, we'd have 51 forms of money in America. Not a good thing. So, it was an experiment, it failed. They fixed it with the Constitution. So the next type of power, and these are, your textbook calls delegated powers exclusive powers. I don't like to use it that way. Next one you can see is concurrent powers. Concurrent powers you probably learned in high school as shared powers. These are powers that all governments share, federal, state, and local. Prime example, taxation. But it's different. Under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government had no power of taxation at all, which was a nightmare. How do you pay for anything? Concurrent powers now with taxes, we know, and we talked a little bit about taxes previously. Federal government can tax you. They tax your income. They take money out of your paychecks for Social Security, Medicare. State government can tax you. They tax your income. They have a sales tax. County governments can tax you. Clinton County can tax your property, and they share half of that 8% sales tax. Towns can tax you. They can tax your property. Cities can tax you. They can tax your property. School districts can tax your property. So this is a concurrent or shared power. Another example that sometimes people don't think of as a power is the power of debt or borrowing money. All governments have the power of debt. Obviously, the federal government does, and they don't know what they're doing. Our national debt is 20-some trillion dollars. So boy, do they know about that power. State of New York can issue bonds and go into debt. Clinton County can issue bonds and go into debt. That's how they paid for the Stafford Art and Science building. And part of the renovations that's going on with Clinton Community College today, it's funded by state funding, but also by a bond that the county went into debt to pay for. Cities and towns can go into debt to fund projects and so forth, issue municipal bonds. So can school districts. That's how they pay partially for building a new school, improving an existing school, and so forth. So, power of debt is power. Hopefully, it's used properly and wisely. Now, another example, which we'll be getting into in more detail later, because we'll talk about its origin in the Constitution and a key landmark Supreme Court decision later on in class. That's the power of eminent domain. That's the power of the government to force you to sell your property to them for what they consider to be the public good for a fair, reasonable market value. That's an eminent domain. Federal government typically uses this, especially in the past when they were building interstate highways. Those highways were on somebody's property, and they'd plan out where the highways went, and then you had no choice. You had to sell them that part of your property. State governments can do it. Prime example would be something that you all should be a little bit familiar with anyway. SUNY Plattsburgh. Where SUNY Plattsburgh is today at one point was a residential neighborhood in the city of Plattsburgh. The state used the power of eminent domain, bought the property, built SUNY Plattsburgh. City of Plattsburgh can use eminent domain to buy property from private citizens to expand, the municipal operations like the lighting and so forth. And right now there's a lot of controversy over what they're going to do with existing property, the Durkee Street property, but that's a different issue. County can do this. That's how, where the county buildings are today. At one point used to be businesses or homes. They used eminent domain to gain that property, buy it from its owners. Towns can do it. School districts can do it. Where schools are used to be somebody's property, so it's the same concept. Those are all, concurrent powers. Now, there's a couple of other types of powers that we want to talk about. And the next type that we want to talk about are implied powers. You probably studied these in high school as elastic clauses to the Constitution, meaning power existed in the Constitution. The interpretation of that power could be stretched way out or interpreted very narrowly or constricted, thus the term elastic. What it really means is, well, what your book says, broad but undefined powers given to the federal government by the Constitution. That's what they are. They're powers that are vaguely stated, and they leave themselves open to a wider range of interpretation, typically by Congress and through cases presented to the Supreme Court. So let me give you a couple of examples of implied powers. First one, and your book uses this power, is the General Welfare Clause. That's contained in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. States that Congress has the power to provide for the general welfare of the United States. What the hell is the general welfare? It's an implied vague power left open to wide interpretation. Let me give you a couple examples of general welfare. Seatbelt laws. When Congress passed seatbelt law, or a requirement in a transportation bill requiring all states to pass seatbelt laws or lose funding, that's using the power of protecting the general welfare. It's protecting all citizens from being injured in catastrophic auto accidents. Now, another example would be when the federal government forced states to raise the drinking age across the country to 21 years old. Once again, the congressional argument was they're protecting the general welfare of all Americans because statistics showed 18, 19, and 20-year-olds got in many more alcohol-related auto accidents than 21 years or older American citizens. So they're protecting everyone in their minds. Now, another example of implied powers is the very last clause of Article 1, Section 8, which is commonly known as the necessary and proper clause. And in the necessary and proper clause, it states to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into the execution the foregoing powers. So, it certainly sounds vague and meets the qualifications of implied. What the hell is necessary and proper? Whatever Congress thinks is necessary and proper, you might believe. But this implied power is really more constricted than the general welfare clause because it has to be used to carry out powers stated before that in Article 1, Section 8, which is like a grocery list of powers that Congress has. Power to tax, the power of debt, the power to declare war, the power to coin money. That's how we shifted to only the feds being the ones coining money instead of having 14 forms. And that brings me to an example of the necessary and proper clause in coining money. Alexander Hamilton, back in the early years of the Washington administration, proposed to Congress that they needed to create a national bank in order to shift to one form of currency and also have a place for the federal government to hold its tax revenues or tariff revenues. Now, there was a lot of controversy about that because nowhere in Article 1, Section 8 does it state Congress shall have the power to declare a national bank, but they do have the power to coin money. And as Hamilton argued successfully, and George Washington signed this into law, it is necessary and proper to have a national bank to be able to coin money. So, today you can see that's still existing. We don't have a national bank. We have the Federal Reserve Board. It's a modern hybrid version of a national bank. So, that's necessary and proper. Now, the final division of power that I want to mention to you, and I mentioned to this previously, that's the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment reads, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now, that means all those powers not specifically given to the federal government in Articles 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 become powers of the states. The 10th Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments that were added to the Constitution in 1791. Now, a common example of reserve powers is regulating traffic on the streets. That's a state power. And when you think about it, here's one easy way to think about it. Is there any such thing as a federal highway patrolman? No. Closest thing we have, I guess, up in our neck of the woods is Border Patrol, but they can't pull you over for traffic infractions. They don't have radar detectors in the cars either. Traffic on the streets, as far as we're concerned, is regulated by state police, Clinton County Sheriff, and the City of Plattsburgh police forces. They're the ones who make sure we're driving carefully and issue traffic citations. Now, also, traffic laws vary from state to state to state. For example, any of you have driven around the country know some states have maximum speed limits on their freeways 70, 75 miles per hour, and the maximum posted speed limit in New York State is still 65. That's a state by state by state issue. Reserved powers allow the states to make those decisions. So, that's it for today. That's the division of powers. Go ahead and read the rest of Chapter 2 if you haven't. I also gave you a copy of Madison's Federalist 51, where he tries to explain what federalism is all about. Remember, that document was written in 1787 by a political genius, and he uses a different term because federalism is a modern term. In Federalist 51, when you read it, he refers to it as a compound republic, which is another term for federalism. So, see you soon. Remember, Module 2 closes on Wednesday, June 10th, so get those quizzes done on the website. Continue to be in that discussion. A lot of your grades on that discussion, and some of you need to get in there and be way more active. So, see everybody soon. Be safe. Bye now.